What is OPEC? OPEC stands for the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. It is a group of 15 countries which together account for just under half of the world's oil supply. They seek to coordinate actions with the aim of stabilizing the price of crude oil to maximize the long-term profit from oil production for each of these nations. OPEC is an example of a cartel, reducing fair competition to ensure the best outcome for each member nation. By trying to control the price of oil, the member nations seek to maximize the value of their oil assets. OPEC was founded in 1960 in Baghdad and initially had 5 members: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. The current members of OPEC also include Algeria, Angola, Congo, Ecuador, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Russia is not a member of OPEC, but Russian officials often work alongside the organisation when their interests overlap. Of all the OPEC countries, Saudi Arabia is by far the biggest oil producer, followed in order by Iraq, Iran, the UAE and Kuwait. The members of OPEC meet frequently, often choosing to cut back supply when the price of crude is deemed to be too low. Lower supply will lead to a shortage of available oil and thus lead to consumers increasing the amount they are willing to pay for any they get access to. When the price of oil is deemed to be too high, OPEC will increase supply and thus move the price lower. OPEC fears high oil prices could drive consumers into alternative fuels and thus lose oil revenue over the long term. In 1973, OPEC declared an oil embargo against much of the Western world as punishment for offering support to Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The reduction in supply caused oil prices to spike from $20 a barrel to over $50. The higher cost of oil caused hardship for families and businesses around the world, sending many economies into recession. Since then, most countries maintain emergency stockpiles of oil to protect from a similar supply disruption. In the early 1980s, the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War caused another large drop in oil supply, moving the oil price above $100. This caused many Western governments to further reduce their reliance on oil by turning towards coal, nuclear energy and natural gas. Over the next few years, this reduced demand for oil caused the price to plunge back to around $40 per barrel. This drop in prices was seen as one of the reasons for the collapse of the Soviet bloc in 1989. In 2015, the Chinese economy started to slow, reducing demand for oil. Around the same time, technological advances were leading to massive increases in the supply of oil from North America and causing the price of oil to drop sharply. Initially, OPEC allowed prices to stay low in the hope this approach would bankrupt many of the newer oil-producing companies in non-OPEC countries. The plan was to allow prices to rise again once these companies had disappeared. However, in 2016, with oil trading around $30 per barrel, many OPEC member countries were having trouble balancing their books. With some governments fearful of cutting public spending lest it led to civil unrest, OPEC elected to cut production once again in order to increase prices. So, in summary, OPEC is an international organisation tasked with maximising profits for oil sales from the member countries. Many of these countries rely heavily on proceeds from oil sales to balance their budgets. When oil prices are deemed to be too low, OPEC will often call on member nations to reduce their production. This drop in supply should increase the price of oil and thus make all producers better off. When the price of oil is deemed to be too high, and thus encouraging the development of alternative energy sources like renewable or perhaps encouraging more production from non-OPEC nations, OPEC will often decide to increase supply to push the oil price lower in the hope of reducing supply from elsewhere and encouraging consumers to increase their purchases of oil.